What's up everybody, back with another raid guide, and today we're taking a look at Sylvanas Windrunner on Mythic difficulty. I'll be going over most of the mechanics, how to deal with them, and our overall tactic for this fight. So good old Sylvanas. Setup wise, just 2 tanks, 4 healers, and 14 DPS. You want at least 1 warlock for gateways, and if possible, bring at least 2 boomkins, they carry phase 1 intermission. And overall, shamans and druids for windrushes and roars help out immensely here. But we'll go over that in a bit. So due to the nature of this fight and it being a very long fight, this video will drag on a bit, but I'll leave timestamps if you just want to watch specific parts. Before we start breaking down the encounter, I just want to mention our cooldown assignments and splits. We used a spreadsheet for this fight where we assigned our DPS and movement speed cooldowns, as well as how we split our raid in phase 2, what to cooldown, and all that jazz, which was extremely helpful for our progress. And you'll find this spreadsheet in the description below, so do check that out. Tons of helpful info in it. Huge shout out to Max in Loot for the Win for setting it up, as well as Andrew T and the Consequence Guild, as we based a lot of our cooldown rotation on his video. Anyways, let's hop into phase 1 and what's new here. The big new thing here are the Domination chains, Black Arrow, as well as increased size on Veil of Darkness. So starting off with the Domination chains, first thing to keep in mind is the Calamity and Woe that's been added. Calamity, if a player goes inside the circle around whichever arrow they are chained to, everyone within 30 yards die. And Woe, anytime a player gets chained, they get 1 stack of Woe and deals around 1300 damage to everyone in the raid. If the same player gets chained again, they get 1 more stack and its damage is increased by 100% per stack. And lastly, Domination chains now spawns in set locations-ish, as seen in these award-winning pictures. You'll always get 2 clumps of 4 arrows per cast. So first 2 clumps can spawn in these 2 red marked areas, 1 left, 1 right. And the second set spawn location, and lastly, you have the third set spawn location. This makes it a lot more controlled, so you can always choose who gets chained, who loses stacks, etc, etc. Now, for the Black Arrow, which works like the Wailing arrows in phase 3, but they spawn adds. These adds, or Dark Sentinels, fixates a random player and deals a ton of damage if they reach their target. You can slow, stun, grip, knock, etc to keep them away, but every 4.5 seconds their damage is increased by 10% and they can't be slowed below 20% of normal speed, and it stacks. And any subsequent cast of Black Arrow increases the amount of targets as well as adds spawned per arrow by 1. So first arrow, 1 target, 2 adds. Second set of arrows, 2 targets, 3 adds per, and third set, 3 targets and 4 adds per arrow. And lastly, they've increased the size of her Veil of Darkness, which is one of the reasons Roar and Windrush is amazing on this fight. So with these changes in mind, how do we deal with all of this? Well, for the Domination chains, we used a Weakauras that I'll link in the descriptions below. This one checks each player's barbed arrow stacks and assigns them to either get chained by the left clump or the right clump of arrows. And since the chains spawn in somewhat set locations, these players just need to make sure they're the closest players to the left or right clump of chains. Players chained to the left can go DPS right chains and vice versa, but we also assigned 1 to 2 DPS cooldowns per chain clump for every set of chains, like 1 Hunter pops cooldowns on left and Ellie Shaman on the right, etc, etc. The faster they die, the easier it gets, but you don't want everyone to run to chains and nuke. Boss still needs to be slapped a bit. And as far as the mythic mechanics, Calamity and Woe, as long as you don't get dragged into your chain or keep getting chained when you don't have stacks, they don't really matter. We always use the middle as a reference point for spotting which chain clump you need to get chained to. So if you get assigned to do the left clump of chains, imagine yourself standing in the middle of the room looking out. It's the easiest way to spot the correct one. And lastly, things like Kyrian Pot, Bop, Dwarf Racial all works on the bleed and can be used instead of taking a chain or if you get really high stacks. Now for the Black Arrows, wherever Sylvanas is, you drop him on the opposite side of the room. This will make a bit more sense when I break down phase 1, but yeah, wherever Sylvanas is, run through her, far away on the opposite side, and if there's multiple Black Arrows, you want to put all of them in the same location, or at the very least in line with each other, so adds spawn somewhat stacked. Players fixated by the adds needs to position themselves so their add moves towards the boss, lines through the boss, and you're golden. Make sure to slow, vortex stun, etc to keep them from going through the boss so they never reach their targets. Now, with that that out of the way, let's break down phase 1, starting off with the marks. There's really only one important mark, which is where we have our square mark. All other marks are pretty much whatever, but the square one is where you'll bait the first 2 Veil of Darknesses. Other marks you can add if needed for calls or reference points or whatever. Make sure you have a gateway going from the middle smack on top of the blue mark. So on pull, melee on boss, range and healers loosely spread closer to where the first set of chains will spawn. If you get assigned either left or right, make sure you move close enough to the chain clump to ensure you get chained, and have 1 or 2 players use cooldowns on each set of chains. Again, you can check the spreadsheet I linked in the description for our cooldowns. One of your tanks will get Black Arrow about the same time. This one you can kinda drop wherever, as it only spawns 2 Sentinels. I usually dropped it near the chains so range could smack him. Melee will always follow boss unless they need to get chained or needs to cool down a set of chains. Range stay in the middle of the room, nuke Sylvanas if she's in range, otherwise smack chains. When there's a few seconds left before the first Veil of Darkness, all range and healers needs to be on top of the blue mark. Veil will target the biggest clump of players, so it should always target blue mark if all range and healers are there. It's either largest clump of player or largest clump of ranged players. Have heard both. Either way, put all your range and healers in one spot and you'll get Veil there. I recommend using gateway to get to the blue mark, and then you want a Windrush or Roar when the Veil spawns so everyone makes it out in time. Following this, smack boss and wait for the second set of chains and Veil. Boss will spawn chains and jump away. Melee follows boss unless assigned to get chain. Range stay put on blue mark, since next Veil needs to be baited around blue mark again. And this Veil happens a few seconds after the second set of chains. If possible, you want to Windrush or Roar this Veil as well. Now during all of this, you'll also get your first real set of Black Arrows, because it now targets 2 random players and spawns 3 adds per arrow. Drop them opposite of where boss is. Fixated players needs to make sure their line goes through the boss. Depending on your overall boss damage, you can either start hard CCing him with stuns, knocks and vortexes a bit away from the boss so you don't cleave Sylvanas with them, or right behind her so you do cleave her as well as the adds. We started doing adds next to boss but had to stop doing it due to a tad too much boss damage, which a lot of guilds will run into. Anyways, full focus on the adds, make sure they die fast and make sure you don't get hit if you're fixated. They slap real good. And during this you want to put up a new gateway going from where you are right now and towards where we have our skull mark. And you want all your range and healers to use this gateway when there's like 2 seconds left before the next Veil of Darkness, which is the third one. And this is just to get her into position for the third set of chains. So following this Veil of Darkness, she will instantly cast new chains and jump away. During this, you'll get your last set of Black Arrows for this phase. 3 players, 4 adds per arrow. Same thing here, opposite side of where boss is. Slow him early, make sure second arrow drops roughly where first arrow dropped, third where second, etc. to make sure the adds are clumped up nicely. Full focus on the adds and make sure they die before the 4th Veil goes off. And you want to push boss to 84% or around 83.9 or something, either right before or during the 4th Veil. If you push like 2 seconds after the 4th Veil, you'll get a 4th set of chains, plus the intermission chains, which is not awesome. And if you push too soon, you might still have adds up. We struggled a lot with trying to always push during the 4th Veil, but changed to push instead whenever adds are dead, or during the Veil, which made it a lot simpler. If you get the 4th Veil, you can bait it wherever, it really doesn't matter, and remember you can still hit her during it. So if you're at like 84 point something, you can push that last percentage during the Veil, if people are ready for it. Now with that out of the way, let's move on to the intermission. Now this one is a bit rough. You will get a total of 4 big clusters of chains here. One with 6 to 7 chains in it that always spawns in the middle, and 3 clumps of 4 that spawns around the room. And you can also get a rando chain somewhere. It seems to be between 19 to 20 chains, because some pulls we had a player not get chained, but vast majority of pulls we got 20 of them, including on our kill. They usually spawn in somewhat the same locations, but they can wander around a bit, because why not? And it can look something like this. Now, Sylvanas has also beefed up her Rive ability and now throws several chunks of chore gas at players instead of 1. You just gotta remember the 5 Ds of dodgeball. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. So what we did for the intermission was, as soon as it starts, we all stack up, usually center down as seen in the picture. Everyone popped whatever damage reduction or immunities they have, because this will make it a lot easier healing wise. Like legit, every immunity, every defensive, personal, and some raid cooldowns, because this is the only place where the though mechanic comes into play. Pretty much everyone gets a chain, therefore raid takes a ton of damage, so immunes and damage reduction. We also assigned 2 hunters, 2 mages, and a paladin healer to always go to the furthest away clump of chains instead of stacking with the rest of us, so they'd get chained by those, and all of them popped immunities before they got chained to survive. But there's lots of ways to deal with those chains. You can, for example, have melee be furthest away from him, so they hopefully get chained by something else and then run over and nuke him down. The rule we followed was melee runs to chains opposite of the one they get chained to, and range prio their own chain first. But in all fairness, the big D here is the boomkins. 2 boomkins carry this phase as they can hit at least 3 out of 4 chain clumps, and sometimes all of them. They just do an absurd amount of damage, and yes, it works with Night Fae boomers, that's what we used. If you don't have access to boomkins, you'll probably need to assign some big AoEers to certain chain clumps, as well as a cooldown or 2 extra to make sure they die fast. Sounds cliche, but the faster they die, the easier it gets by a mile. Damage ramps up real fast, and eventually people won't be able to dodge rives or get away from chains. And as soon as all the chains are dead, dodge rives for what feels like an eternity, spread for Banshee's Wail, and pat yourselves on the back. Phase 2 Inc. So let's take a look at what's new in Phase 2. The biggest thing here is more of everything, mainly due to the fact that there's 2 sides to deal with instead of 1. So at the start of Phase 2, you'll get a bridge going to the right and one that goes to the left, each with their own set of adds. On top of this, there's one new big add, the Colossus, which we'll go over in a bit, and the summoners spawn a new orb, the Terror Orb. This orb is interruptible and will fear everyone within 70 yards for 2 seconds if it's not interrupted. Now for this part of the fight, how you split up your raid, how many cooldowns you use for each platform or chain, whatever you want to call them, has a big impact. I again ask you to check out the spreadsheet in the description for our splits and cooldowns. It's all a fine balance between killing adds in time, so you get full uptime on boss for her first and second burn, and maximizing damage done during these burns. The lower you get her before phase 3, the easier phase 3 gets, so there's a lot of min-maxing to be done here. I won't go over all of our splits and cooldown assignment as they're all in the spreadsheet, and it will change depending on setup and players, etc, etc. So instead, let's go over left and right sides and how to deal with the adds and Veil. First thing I want to mention are movement speed. Again, Windrushes and Roars are great for getting across the bridges fast and helps a metric ton. So if possible, you want to have 1 Roar or Windrush before the first bridges spawn, since raid is stacked here. Then you want 1 Roar or Rush on each side when the second bridge spawns. Then 1 combined Roar for the next bridge, then 1 on each side for the final bridge. Again, if possible. But let's go over the sides instead. Now for the first platforms, left and right. Left, you'll get a Soul Judge and Goliath, and you want full focus on the Soul Judge. Right side, you'll get a Summoner and a Goliath. Full focus on the Summoner instead. Make sure the Terror Orbs gets interrupted, and everyone should swap to all the orbs as soon as they spawn. They got like no health, but it's important that they die really fast. On both left and right side for the Veils, melee and tank stack up near where the adds on each side spawns, and range kinda max range the adds, as you can see here. If all goes well, you'll have a nice gap between range and melee camp that range can move into, and melee can go wherever they feel like. It's important that you stay somewhat stacked before Veil of Darkness. How they spawn can be a bit iffy, so if you're a bit outside of the group, or if RNG spawns a Veil between range and melee, you might not make it out in time. Now as soon as both the big adds are dead on both sides, wait for the bridge to spawn, then move over to Sylvanas. Put a gateway by her side going straight ahead, and a few seconds before Veil, everyone just pixel stacks on top of the boss, wait for Veil to spawn, then click gateway. Makes it super simple to not get hit. Just make sure you have focus, mouse over, and interact with mouse over macros set up for the gateway. Now melee, remember to always move out a bit when she starts casting Haunting Wave. They really hurt on Mythic, so avoid getting stacks at all cost. When she starts casting second Haunting Wave, melee start running away towards the next set of bridge. Range can stay and milk some damage before she goes immune. Spread out for Banshee and make sure you don't get hit by the waves. This time the left side will get 1 one mob, which is the new Colossus, and right side will get another Summoner and a Soul Judge. So for the left side and the Colossus, it's pretty straightforward. He does a frontal cone, filth, that tank aims away, and he targets 2 players with Expulsion, which deals a ton of damage split between players within 8 yards. So stack near Colossus, move as a group when Veil spawns, stack again after Veil, and that's pretty much it. Right side, however, full focus on the Summoner and Orbs, crushing Dread to the edges and make sure you bait Veil properly. One group in melee and range somewhat max range and stacked. Following these 2 sides is another boss burn, play it the same way as the previous one, use Gateway for the Veil. Few things to keep in mind as you start progress on phase 2. I suggest you overkill cooldown usage on the ads, and as you progress further and further, start pulling back on cooldowns and put them on the boss instead. For the sake of learning phase 2 and actually getting to phase 3 and getting some practice there, boss damage doesn't matter at all. And the more comfortable players get, the more damage they'll do, and you'll be able to put out more and more cooldowns on Sylvanas instead of ads. The next thing is the haunting waves. Keep in mind that their patterns are static, so they will always be the same. So if you found a route that works where you dodge all the ways, keep with it. It won't change, at least so I've been told, and it seems to check out. And on the topic of waves, do not underestimate how much damage they do. Lastly, when a Soul Judge dies, players will still have Crushing Dread, but it doesn't do anything, so it's safe to stand in player's circle. There's a Weakaura that will shout out "FAKE" when this happens, that I'll link in the description. Now on to the fun part, which is phase 3. The big new thing here are 1 extra Veil of Darkness target, Merciless, and Death Knives. The extra Veil target just means it's way more to heal through and way more punishing if you're not spread, as there's a big chance more players get hit by each other's Veil. Merciless, however, is a new mechanic where the Jailer spawns circles that needs to be soaked. Miss one and anyone within 38 yards pretty much dies. And when you soak one, you take a lot of damage, but you also get knocked away from the middle of the circle. So be towards the direction you want to get knocked to. And these spawn in somewhat set locations, so it's pretty easy to assign who soaks them. And knives work-ish as they did on Heroic, but instead of going from Sylvanas, it now goes from 3 players. Simplest way to deal with it is just players targeted by the knives move back and out during the first 2 seconds, then stay still and the rest of the raid adjust to their lines. Now for the Veil and Merciless assignments. As you can see here, this is a rough estimate of our spreads during phase 3, on every platform for every Veil and for every Banshee Scream. So I recommend doing something like this for your guild just to make the spread part easier. We use this picture and the Covenant Sigil in the corner as a reference point. Doesn't matter what platform you are, as long as you look at the Covenant Sigil and adjust accordingly. The locations or players that have circles around them are rough estimates of where the Merciless soaks will spawn. The blue circles are the 2 soaks that will spawn on the second platform 2 times. The 4 red circles are the soaks that spawns on the 3rd platform 2 times. And you don't get soaks on first and final platform. So when we assign the spreads, we put for example 1 boomkin in each of the blue circles, so that was their spread location as well as soak location. And for the red circles we assign hunters, mages with immunes, because those are really handy for those soaks. We use 2 hunters that turtled and 2 mages that altered time for the first set of quad soaks on the 3rd platform. Then 2 mages and 2 paladins that ice blocked and bubbled for the 2nd set of quad soaks. And these are the red circles in the picture. This is mainly because these soaks can spawn in a lot of poop on the ground and there's a lot of damage going on, so it's just safer to immune them when you soak them. Now with that out of the way, let's talk puddles instead and puddle soaks. One of the biggest things about phase 3 is puddle management for tanks and keeping future platforms clean as well as current platforms clear for Veils. Have fun, tanks. What we did for this was designate 1 tank to be the boss tank or main tank and current platform vacuumer, and the other tank mainly cleaned the other platforms. Now with that said, let's break down phase 3. At the start of phase 3, you want to send one of your tanks to the left side to clean platform 3 and 4. If possible, pick up all the puddles and get back to the first platform after Veil. We sent our Resto Druid to the right side platform, which is the second platform, to clear all the puddles there. This can also be done done by a tank after first Banshee's Fury, but it's less of a headache if you can just send someone else for that one. If possible, I'd advise against sending a DPS, as you'll probably need all the damage you can get, but worst case, you can have a DPS do it as well. Rest of the raid is spread out for Veil. Current Sylvanas tank clears current platform from Puddles before this Veil. Dispel both tanks before or during Banshee's Fury. If possible, you want to have a priest mass dispel during Banshee's Fury, so it goes off 1 second before Banshee's Fury. And this is just as a backup if someone accidentally picks up a Puddle. Then you want to wait for race and jump over when there's 1 second left, just to milk some damage. Now, whichever tank has aggro on Sylvanas as you jump over to the second platform will get Wailing Arrows, so keep that in mind. That tank can clear Puddles on third platform while waiting for Wailing Arrow to hit, if there are any up. Now, for this particular Wailing Arrow, which is the first one you get in phase 3, you need to deal with it a bit differently due to the merciless soaks that goes off during it. One of these spawns on the third platform, so the third Wailing Arrow needs to go to the fourth platform or they'll most likely die. So first Wailing Arrow jumps one platform and stands fairly close to the edge, jumps back directly after the arrow has landed. As soon as first arrow has hit, second and third arrow jumps over together. Then the third arrow jumps one more platform instantly, and they both jump back after their arrows have landed. Any subsequent Wailing Arrows just go one by one. One hits, next one jump, one hits, next one jumps. For the rest of the peeps on the second platform, spread out to your positions and you'll get your first knives. And like I said, targeted players move back a bit during the first 2 seconds, then stops. Rest of the raid needs to adjust to their lines, make sure not to get hit by one, stay spread for Scream and Veil. Directly as the Veil hits, you'll get your first merciless soaks that you actually soak, which will be the 2 in the corner, where we have our boomkins assigned. Directly after this, everyone stacks smack on top of boss so you can heal through the Veil debuffs, and for the Banshee's Fury. Tanks, make sure to get the spell 2 or 3 seconds before it goes off. Mass dispel the raid 1 sec before it goes off in case of accidental stacks. Following this, new pools, into Wailing Arrows, into new merciless soaks, into Veil of Darkness. Make sure that the main tank soaks up most of the puddles on the current platform before Veil. You don't have to clean the very edges of the platform though, so keep that in mind. During the next Wailing Arrow, you'll get your second set of merciless soak, same position as the previous soak. This is followed by Veil into Raise. The tank that gets Wailing Arrow here needs to clean the new puddles on the third platform, either during the Wailing Arrow or directly after it. I know our tank jumped over with Wailing, soaked a few before the arrow hit, went back to current platform, then back again to the third platform after all the arrows had hit and cleaned the rest. Whatever works, it just needs to be clear. Both tank keeps these stacks until race, where if possible you again want to mass dispel it so it hits like 1-2 seconds before race goes off, so both tanks and any other stacks gets dispelled and left on the old platform. And make sure to stack near the edge towards the third platform when the boss casts race so healers can heal through the Veil debuffs. Third platform will start with a Banshee's Fury, make sure no one has a stack left, and make sure to stack on top of boss for healing, and this is followed by knives. Following this, spread out for Scream into Merciless Soaks, which is now in the opposite corner, and there's 4 of them instead of 2. And these are the ones you immunity soak or altered time or whatever you need to do. Following the soaks, you get Veil, stack up on boss after Veil for healing, so you get rid of the debuffs. Next Wailing Arrow, go one at a time, and again off tank needs to clean puddles whenever they can to make sure the last platform is clean before the final burn. You don't need to clean all at once. Our tank did a few puddles during Wailing Arrow, a few right before Banshee's Fury, then the rest after. Following this Wailing Arrow, new pool spawn into Banshee's Fury. Again, dispel tanks in a corner, MD at the last second. This is followed by knives into your last quad merciless soak, and you want to immune soak these if possible. And the main tank wants to make sure to clean the current platform before the next Veil, then you hold on to all the stacks until race, dispel during it. And it's time for the final burn. Now as soon as you get to the final platform, you'll get a set of Wailing Arrows. Raid stacks up as far back as possible in the Covenant Sigil corner, gateway going from the side of the sigil to the opposite corner. First arrow, which is tank, goes to the corner. As soon as it hits, second arrow clicks gateway. As soon as that arrow hits, third arrow clicks gateway. Stack up close to the boss for Banshee's Fury, knives move out, spread to your positions after knives for Scream, tanks clear new puddles that spawned, then all stay spread for Veil. The spell tanks after Veil on either of the sides of the corner that isn't Covenant Sigil or where you drop Wailing Arrows. Everyone else stacks on the Sigil after Veil for healing, and we Bloodlust in third pot here. When you get your next set of Wailing Arrow, if things are looking a bit dicey, you can sacrifice the third Wailing Arrow to reduce raid damage. Just have that player yeet off the platform and you'll be fine. After these Wailing, you get your last set of knives into Banshee Fury into last race. Kill boss before lack of platform kills you. Easy peasy. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Hope this clears this fight up a bit for y'all, and please let me know in the comments when you've defeated her. I also want to give a huge shout out to everyone in Loot for the Win for all their help with POVs for the guides, as well as Broccoli's, my patrons, and all the peeps in the Stankie Discord for all your help and support. You are all amazing and I appreciate it immensely. Now with that said, if you have any questions at all about this encounter, hit me up in the comments or become a patron or Twitch sub and get access to the Stankie Discord, where you can find raid Weakauras, healing notes, and a lot of awesome people that can help you out with anything raiding related. Don't forget the usual stuff, like, comment, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. I'm also streaming all of our progression on Twitch, so do make sure to check that out. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time in whatever tier it is.